Really, I'm looking at myself, and it looks just centered just right. Got a
All
little
right.
bit.
No, because well, the
Welcome
problem
back.
is that these little squares cut you off at the bottom. Sorry.
Oh, I have this. I have
Craziness!
this too.
Crazy people, stop talking!
But
Three Hands Academy, number 20, part 2. The return of Jim Reilly and Emmett Chapman. As you were, gentlemen.
In your corners.
In our corners.
thank you,
We'll
Gene.
get Dale back on in a minute.
Okay, so
Thank you.
where did we get cut off? Was it when I was asking Jim about improvisation, and we were talking about improvised speech, improvised music?
It's about right.
So actually, that's good. I had a couple thoughts while we were getting back online. And you talked about listening to myself, but I'm also listening to the room, and I'm listening to the audience. And if I'm in a place like a coffee shop or something, I'll play with the audience, and like a little game. So I'll start playing really quietly, and then hear the conversation kind of burble up and get louder, and then so I'll start playing louder, and people will get quieter. So it's not just listening to myself, but listening to everything else that's around, and trying to play music that's speaking to the whole situation and environment in the room and everything else that's going on as well. That's one of my favorite things to do, is to play with the crowd that way, play with the people listening that way.
When you're improvising, you can do that. You have to get into a particular mode, and I have my own version of it. Sometime I'll do that, just pick up the instrument with no effects and start playing before the program begins.
Yep.
Just play to the room. It might be the first and last time that I actually play to the room with that kind of feeling. And it feels so good to do that. And what I'm doing is I'm really sensing my own mood as it relates to the room and the audience.
Right.
So kind of close to what you're doing.
Yeah, I remember when I was working down there. I remember, and I've told you this story before, that I used to come half hour earlier. So, oh, can you hear that ring? I think they're testing a fire alarm out in the hall.
Uh-oh.
Which I'll ignore, especially if you guys can't hear. So I used to come half hour earlier, so, and you'd be playing, and you'd be in your office there, and I'd be set up at the computer in the other room, and you'd just be kind of randomly doing that, just randomly exploring stuff, and it was one of my favorite musical experiences, just being off in the other room, and I don't think you were aware that anybody else was around, but just playing and exploring and trying stuff and just play for the sake of play. It was.
Thank you for that. That's what I like to do best. And I remember Ben Weber, who worked here just a few years ago. He said something very similar too. He'd hear me from the middle office, and I'd be in my room playing. And I don't get to do that very much anymore. I'm pretty much stuck with papers and bills and insurance and banking, and so when I do get to play, it's like in a flood, and I'll play for an hour, and time will just stand still for me. But that might just be once a week, and it's too bad that I don't get to.
I remember there were times when Emmett was playing all day.
That's right, Dan.
Practicing all day.
That would be like when I was getting ready to record in the middle '80s, and even before that, I had the time. I'd go into a production mode, and then we'd do a run of instruments, and then there'd be months that go by with no production. And I'd play a lot, and go to New York, and Utah would send me out on tour, and it was those were great times. Mm-hmm. Can't do that anymore.
No. Yeah, who can?
Hey, I have a question for you. I have a question for the two of you.
Yep.
For a while, Jim, were you in and working at Stick Enterprises?
Yeah, I spent about 6 months down there. I think it was '94. No, what? Yeah, it was January '94. In fact, I started on December 17th, 1993, and I remember that because I got my first stick. I got December 17th, 1993, and I remember pulling up in front of Stick Enterprises, 10 years to the day when I first started playing stick. And I was there about 6 months or so, just helping out in the office and doing.
Yeah, you
doing that
were
kind
going to
of work.
live in U.S.
That was the plan. Yeah, we we were gonna move the family down. At that time, I was married at the time. I've since remarried, but we were both going to move down and work down there with Emmett. What happened was the paperwork. We had issues with the paperwork trying to go through, which is a whole other story in and of itself.
What a drag.
Yeah, but it turned into this big ordeal and was dragging on and on and on, and I just had to get back up to Canada. And so it's funny though. I often think about how life would have been different had that worked out. Had I been able to actually transplant down there and work down there with Emmett full time.
That
Would
was
have been
our
a different world for sure.
that was our plan, and
Yeah.
and it got hijacked by bureaucracy and some catch-22 where you were
Yeah.
told to work for me, but I needed somebody skilled, and Canadian labor that was too skilled didn't qualify somehow.
Yeah, so the official reason was that it wasn't specified, that the job wasn't specific enough for my skill set, which was, there was only one person, honestly, that in the world that could have done what I was doing, with it was going to be PR office kind of stuff, and so to do that, to have the relationship with the instrument and the music background and the journalist background. But I do remember there was some paperwork issues with the immigration lawyer that we had, and in hindsight it looked like she had copied and pasted from a previous application, and there was just some language that didn't make sense, and again it just turned into a big ordeal that.
That lawyer forged my name, my signature,
Something
and
like that, yeah.
used boilerplate language to describe what we do that I felt made us look bad to any other bureaucrat who might want to read it from
Sure.
any immigration office. And we tried to get it all changed, and it was impossible to go back and have it reconsidered.
Yep.
Or it would have been expensive, I think, too.
Yeah, a combination of things, and again, just being, I was down by myself, and everything else was back up in Canada and sort of put on hold, and I needed to get back home and yeah, sort things out back up there.
And then you worked
I have a question for you, Emmett.
on
Emmett, I have
telephone
a question
lines
for
for a
you.
while.
What kind of employee was Jim?
Yes.
Oh, can I answer this question?
Very punctual.
I can answer this one for you, and I know because Emmett did my horoscope, and I remember when he did it, he brought it in, and he says this is, as your employer, this is a really, really good horoscope. So however it lined up, the stars told him that I was trustworthy and hardworking and diligent and whatever it was. But I remember him being very happy of the fact that I was working for him, and the horoscope supported that it was a wise hire to have me down there.
Why didn't you show the horoscope to immigration?
Yeah, we probably should have. We probably should have. Except I'd probably be down in, probably still in prison down in downtown Los Angeles if we had done that.
There it is.
There it is.
Uh-oh. This is privileged information.
Yeah.
Jim,
I won't interpret it.
Did you pull that from the Bat Cave? Like, what is that?
Parallel galaxies.
I have it.
Yeah.
I have a book of horoscopes.
I'm in there.
That's right. These are just. Here's my dog. He's got a very good horoscope with a blue triangle. You can't beat that.
Okay, what sign is Buckley? That's his
He's a
dog.
Scorpio with Gemini rising. So,
I don't know
anyway,
about those Scorpios.
so Jim is a Virgo with Sun conjunct Jupiter, which is excellent. Good chart.
There you go.
Lots of blue lines, which means harmony and gifts and talents.
There you go. Good.
Yep. So enough of that.
All with a grain of salt.
I never knew.
Now you do. Now you do.
Cool. So, like, did he show up on time? I mean, like, you know, was he like fun to work with?
Yeah, it was.
I mean, did he like drink all the coffee and not make another pot?
Nope.
I hate when that happens.
What? There he is. Sorry. We, we didn't have any definite hours, but he was daily with us, and he worked with customers and coordinating production with customer orders, and he was involved in publicity and all manner of things. He worked in the office next to my own studio here, and the office next to where Utah worked on the other side. We have 3 offices in our upstairs second story, and so he worked in the middle one.
Yeah.
And
in all honesty, it was kind of like the dream job, right? Like I got to work at the place where the sticks were made, to be a part of that you know, a part of the whole deal, the real deal. It honestly was the dream job at the time.
Did you bond with Stick Enterprises?
Did I bond with Stick Enterprises? Yeah. Yes, I think I did. But even before then, like I know that. Trying to remember how that kind of connection came in place. But even a few years before that, I'd been down a few times and I'd visited, and I'd actually started on the bio project before I started working with you as well, which I think was another reason why it was such a good fit. I kind of already had a pretty solid sense of
Talk about
how
it.
things were
Talk
going.
about the bio.
What would you like to know about the bio? Except that I think it's done. It's done. Emmett and I we're going back and forth on the last few bits, and I think I have a couple more pages to send down to him, just for a fact check kind of thing, and then I'm waiting on a forward by a guest writer that I'll name when it shows up, and then it's done. It's ready to go.
Yeah, so it's very timely. We just finished just a few days ago, where he sent me the latest chapters, and I got to see them, and so it's finished as far as I know.
Yeah, pretty much. Like I said, I'm just waiting for a forward from a writer to be named later, and then it's good to go. My goal is to have it ready for the Freehands Academy session.
Wow.
And that's my goal, is to have it ready for that.
Any insights or ideas about it?
Get me going. Ask me a question.
Well, I mean, how many chapters? And
14 chapters. 14 chapters. It actually, honestly, starts at the history of musical instruments, and then goes right up through, which is a very quick part. But I did a few things. So it's Emmett's story, but it's also the story about the instrument and how the instrument developed and evolved, and about the community that's created around the instrument as well. So I really tried to touch base on all those things. So Emmett, his story, the story of the instrument, the story of the community that's grown up around the instrument.
is there a story drama, a story arc to it? Or?
Yeah, well, I'm an English teacher, right? So I know that drill. And honestly, yeah, absolutely. So it really does follow the hero's journey, all that Joseph Campbell stuff, and those things are very much in there. Very much in there. But it really starts from the beginning. I remember the impetus of the story. It was after a stick seminar with Greg down in Charlottesville, Virginia. And I'd stayed a couple days afterwards to just kind of hang out and sightsee and stuff. And I was driving around with Greg, and we got talking about Emmett. And Greg said, you know, Emmett's got this great story. Like his life is just fascinating. He's done all these things. And Greg says, somebody should write that story. And right there, I just knew, like, that's my work. That's my job.
Yeah, you're a writer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Tell them about your other written, the bass thing.
The bass player. Oh yeah. So I have a short fiction, actually, which Dan, you did the cover for. It's called The Bass Player, and it follows a fictional tale of a guy finding his, I don't know what the right word is, finding his music through the bass, upright acoustic bass, kind of loosely based around jazz world of the 30s and 40s.
It's really good.
50s. Yeah. I'll put a link. So I've created a Facebook page for my more creative stuff, my writing ventures, and I'll put a link to it on that Facebook page. And maybe if you ask nicely, I'll put a little code in there for a coupon so that you can download it for free for a few days or something like that. If you ask nicely, because I have all those blue lines that intersect with my thing, and I do nice harmonious things as I'm going to do.
You mean the horoscope?
Yes. Yes. So I have that. I've done writing for other things as well. Some work with Ned Steinberger, which you can find online. I just did a short biography of a guitar player named Fred Corey, who plays nicely into the stick story. Fred was around when Emmett came up with the freehands technique that he created the stick for as well. So I did Fred's got some new music out, and I did a short biographical piece for his writing as well.
Tell us about your that intersection with Emmett and Fred.
Right. So Fred was, well, and you as well, because you were in there as well. So the birth of the stick, and for those of you, I'm assuming I'm preaching to the choir here. So basically, the technique came first. So Emmett is a guitar player. Emmett is a jazz guitar player. Experimented with all sorts of different things on his guitar, adding strings. He had a lever on it that would bend the high E string. He called it the wild string. So playing with his guitar, adding things, combs, different kinds of picks. He had a little baby comb that he fashioned into a guitar pick.
And Vaseline.
And Vaseline. So he's playing this guitar that he made called well, it ended up being the Freedom guitar. Anyways, he's playing this guitar, and it has 9 strings and a elongated neck. And he's hanging around with his brother and his brother's crazy hippie friends, who are all musicians. And Dan's playing in a band, and Fred Corey was the guitar player in the band, who was this fiery Jimi Hendrix-esque guitar player. And when you listen to Fred's music at the time, he was dialed right into that vibe, into that expression and that passion, and that stuff, and the hammer-on technique as well, which Emmett started doing with the one hand. So Fred is hanging around. Emmett is in this really rich. This was Laurel Canyon in the 1960s, with all the things that are going on there. This kind of hotbed for culture and music and experimentation and free thinking and all these things. And Emmett, in a moment of inspiration from somewhere, takes his guitar from here, flips it up to here, and he's tapping with this hand, and he starts tapping with this hand. And he realizes that he can play the chords he knows with his left hand and tap melodies with his right hand, and there you go. So he has now the stick technique. And he says that right from the start it was fluid, and it was fully realized from the start. And listening to his music of that time, I would agree with him. Some of the very early stuff that was recorded with Emmett is passionate and expressive and rich and complex and explorative, and again, really right from the start. So Fred was the local guitar inspiration for Emmett's, I'm going to say, to find that technique.
And Jim, Fred liked to play loud.
Yes.
Dan, and really loud. I'd go out of the trailer where they'd rehearse, and I'd be hearing crickets roaring for a half an hour after that. And what I respected about Fred Corey was he seemed to play like Jimi Hendrix, but his inspiration was Jeff Beck.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and who was a little more disciplined, maybe.
Sure.
Not that discipline was very important back then, because there was all these other things going on with the music. It was excessive music.
Sure.
And Beck had an Eastern thing going on too that Hendrix really didn't have. He was very much influenced by, I think, Eastern music with a lot of the microtones and.
Sure.
Oh, Dan, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think so. What I hear of his music now, some of the stuff is just like a raga, or it's just pretty amazing stuff that Beck is doing.
Yeah, But Hendrix was the explosion, right? Hendrix was the energy and the kind of passion, the over the top exuberance. And what I often think about you, Emmett, is that you were able to capture that free thinking, abstract moment, but not have it just disappear. So you were able to tap into that and then
No pun intended.
right, and then expand upon that, right? And I think because you were kind of an older generation. You were the generation before Dan and Fred and that real, Southern California hippie movement. You were outside of that, but still a part of that. So you were able to take that energy and that experimentation, but then do something with it because you had the life experience behind you.
Well, I was 15. I'm 15 years older than Dan and Fred and his whole group called Vanilla Rain.
Yeah.
And so, to me, it was like a privilege to come back from the Air Force and meet those guys jamming in my mother's garage and at other places, and in their own trailers, and with Larry Duff on Hammond B3, who is the drummer? Oh, I should remember the drummer.
Scott Higgins.
Scott Higgins, so sorry I didn't remember that, who is now a classical percussionist.
Yeah, he plays with the LA Phil.
Wow.
Right, yeah. So
those are the stories, and there's all kinds of those stories in the book, and I've got Fred in there, and Dan's in there a lot as well, and interviews with Emmett's friends from his Canoga Park High School days, and all those bits in there.
How cool.
Yeah, so, Jim, he's the ideal biographer because he immerses himself in it. He's concerned with a community, with something larger. I'm more just from the heart. At least that's how I started. It's very personal. Jim can make it more impersonal. He can take the personal and make it something larger. So he's the guy that wanted to write about the history, and I'm the guy who has all the history. It's right here in my house. I've got records and papers and bundles of stuff that go back. I've got logs that go back through most of corporation up until around the mid-90s, and then I had to quit the logs. But they were all about personal events, ideas, inventions, conversations, patent pursuits, legal pursuits, business ventures, tours, everything. And Yuta and I would enter them. She has as many entries in those logs as I do, all handwritten, all meticulously done, so that there's no lines left blank, and anything meant to be deleted is lightly crossed out. And we'd put that at the preface of every log. I've got 17 of those logs, volumes of logs that go up to about 1995 and started in the 70s. And so I have all this history, and I have no way of getting it out there. But
stacks and stacks of papers.
Yeah. That too. Well, those are about to disappear into boxes, and we're building a structure at another property that we're going to store all this stuff on.
You know who was big with boxes was Stanley Kubrick. He took his. There's a documentary about Stanley Kubrick's boxes, and this guy went into his life and everything that he did, he boxed up, and every movie is all meticulously organized, and it's all in boxes.
Wow.
It's pretty interesting. And the guy went through all of them for 5 years and made a documentary about it.
Well, I do have to say that Emmett has opened up a lot of those boxes to me, and a lot of the press clippings and all that stuff, and made portions of the logs available to me. Actually, in all honesty, I don't think you've ever said no to any questions that I've asked you. There hasn't been anything that you haven't shared.
Well, thank you for that, Jim. I think it's true. I have the same interest as you do.
Yeah.
Out there, and I don't have time to do it or the inclination. I'm always saying, where do we go from here? Right. And you're the guy that puts it all together.
Right, but it is a good story, and I remember saying, right at the beginning, saying that we're at the birth of this instrument, which is a pretty rare opportunity. It doesn't come along very often, and I'm I feel honored to be able to document that and write it down and be a part of that, capturing that moment in time.
And now it's finished. Almost.
Except
for whoever is writing the.
So is there?
Yes,
was
Gene.
there? I mean, and I'm just trying to stir it up here, so you guys can say that's Gene, that's too much. Was there anything that you didn't want in the book? I mean, was there any point where it's just like, don't print that, or was there? You know, I'm just kind of curious to know. Like, we're going to see what you guys.
Want to know the outtakes?
Yeah, are there any outtakes? Right. I mean, just like.
Yeah, there are a few. So my original pitch to Emmett was, and actually this whole project grew from a creative writing class that I was taking at university, and a biography class. And I talked the teacher into letting me see if I could get a hold of Emmett and write this biography. I actually hadn't met Emmett yet. I think I talked with him on the phone when I got my first instrument, but very briefly. But anyways, so I'm in this creative writing class about biographies, and we were supposed to read and critique some biographies. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, why don't I just write one? And so I pitched it to the teacher afterwards, and he said, well, that's a good idea, but I don't know. And then he said, well, do you think you can get a hold of this guy? And I said, well, yeah, for sure. I have his phone number. And then he said, okay, well, yeah, but it's a little outside of the scope of things. And then a couple minutes later, he said, well, and nobody else has done this yet? And I said, no, nobody has. So he says, okay, well, get in touch with them and see what happens. So I put together an email, and the gist of it was, I'm doing this project for this course, and I'd like to write a short biography about you. And if it works well, then explore doing a full version. But if at any time you don't like it, or I have no desire to put anything out there that you don't want out there or anything like that. At any time, if you're not interested, you can pull the plug on it. And I waited for ages and ages to get a response, and I was just about to the point where I was going to give up on it. And I got an email back from Emmett saying, yeah, let's explore this and see what happens. So that was my promise, I guess, or my commitment from the beginning, was to let Emmett have the final say, but with the understanding that we need to touch on some sensitive areas. And there's definitely some areas that are more sensitive than others. And it wasn't all a bed of roses by any stretch of the imagination. But I'm handling those in a way that's true to the story, without trying to jump onto one side or another, but merely present the facts as they happened, and let those facts speak for themselves.
So what's been the most challenging part of it? Sorry if I interrupt.
The most challenging part of the story or the writing
of writing the biography.
Just getting all the pieces together. Like, I guess with your documentary, Dan, just the huge volume of work and the amount of stuff, and it's taken a long time for sure. The one thing that I have that you don't have, Dan, is that I can do everything myself, right? And I don't have the need for equipment and all that stuff. So I can get on the phone and talk to Emmett for a couple hours, and then spend some time putting the pieces, filtering it through and putting it all together.
Oh, so Jim.
Yeah.
You said that I have the final say, but I always understood that you had the final say, because it's your bio, it's your work, and so I guess that makes us very compatible, and why things have gone relatively smoothly.
Yeah, for sure.
Except it's taken so long, and I'm probably partially a good deal to blame for that.
Yeah.
Sorry to say. But things kind of situations change, life situations change, and you lose the momentum, and then you regain it back later, because it's still a treasure. You want to pursue it as a project, whatever it is. And so I have a lot of projects like that. Sorry to say, can't carry them through to completion right away, but they're still there on some burner somewhere.
So the one thing that I've really learned from this is to trust in the process. And had this book come out 5 years ago, it wouldn't be anywhere near as good as it is now. So to trust that when the time is right, that when the time is right, the fruit will be ready. And I think the time is right now. for a lot of reasons, not the least of which the rail board, which puts you in a great position as the builder. That story is at a good point to kind of tie off those loose ends, and time as well. I think you're at a good point in your life to look back and reflect and take credit and accolades for the things you've been able to accomplish. Yeah, and myself as well. Just as a writer, I'm a far better writer than I was, 10, 8, 9 years ago.
Yeah, maybe someday I'll be able to rest on my laurels and look back at it all.
Yeah, honestly, I can't imagine you doing that though. Like I don't see you as somebody who would do that. Although not resting on your laurels, but looking back and appreciating it all. I think that's very well deserved.
I used to live on Laurel Canyon.
Yes, you did.
I remember once.
But you weren't resting though.
No.
Never resting. Always busy, even the wee hours of the morning.
Mm-hmm.
We had Gordon Baird, the publisher of Musician Magazine, came up to see us sometime in the early '80s, and he's the one that told me what Laurel Canyon meant, the laurel weed, which is poison ivy.
Oh.
Poison ivy.
Yeah, and then he petted a dog down the street, and he's Irish, and so there he was. His skin turned red with a rash, and he stayed with us all week and was pretty sick.
Wow. That sounds more edgy. I live in Poison Ivy Canyon.
That's laurel. I don't know. When you think of laurel wreath, you think of the old Roman emperors, right?
Yeah.
Some kind of a crown. So I don't know how it got that name. Hadn't got that far yet.
Hey, I hope you don't mind me asking a couple more questions here, Jim.
Nope. Go ahead.
And Joel, Tom, Francisco, if you guys have questions for Jim, Russell and I are kind of experimenting with a new format where, and so long as you're not letting people finish their sentences and stuff, which no one's doing, just go ahead and ask. Please feel free. My question, Emmett, and again, you can just, if this is, if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine too. But when someone's writing your story, what was the hardest part? What was, like opening yourself up like that to share with everyone to see,
It could be a large or small. Large perspective sometime, but not very often because Jim's really good at that. That's his strong point. It could be facts that don't quite add up, that weren't quite the way I remembered it, and so I would remind him of this and that. And some of the things he already knew and other things that were kind of a revelation to him. And it could be about the family, could be about my own musical progress and the production and music and all that. But there was a lot of that. So it was a lot of communication chapter by chapter, but he called the shots, and it's his work. So it's not about me approving it. It's about putting, as Jim says, we talk about my red pencil and green visor. I'm the guy that likes to proofread, get into the details, and suggest things, but they're always suggestions, just suggestions.
Is the telephone pole story in there?
No.
Really?
No.
Well, it's not printed yet, Dan. We'll have to add that to the list.
Do you know that one?
I don't.
You don't?
No.
Do you want to tell it, Emmett, or?
It happened a block and a half away from here when we lived on Wood Lake in Irwin. Yeah. We moved there in 1945, and I helped my dad build a house there, which is still there, but with a lot of add-ons.
There was nothing but trees.
It was 18 walnut trees. It was Walnut Acres. It's still known by realtors as Walnut Acres, even though there are very few left. They were English walnut trees, American walnut trees, hybrid onto the roots of English walnut trees. So we played football, baseball amid the trees, are widely spaced apart, and we had an acre lot. And I was on Irwin, which is this corner street we lived on, and Wood Lake, they put up these strange black paved streets, and then at the curb it was just uplift like that. I don't even know what to call it, but they have them all around here. They're still here. And so they put telephone poles all along there at a certain point when I was about 12. And we'd walk home from school bus and walk on the telephone poles, and one began to roll, and I tried to catch it. And it was rolling down, and it pinned under my arms and stopped at my neck. And so I was there kicking, hollering for about 4 hours. People would drive by, nobody knew. They thought I was playing. And finally somebody did drive by, a neighbor, who helped me, and they got about 4 guys to help lift up the pole and another person to pull me up. So after that, my arms were numb, my neck was messed up. The next year at summer camp, I had a big problem with crooked neck and from swimming, and I only recently put that together, those two things together.
So Emmett was impaled by a giant pole. A giant stick. Giant wooden stick.
That's dramatic. Not impaled.
That's the way superheroes get their power, right? That's it. That's it.
With the stick power, yes.
Yeah. And it would left residual memory ever since. And at that moment that he thought of the technique, it was that aha moment that he regained control over the wood stick.
Right. So as the biographer, part of my job is to separate the fiction from the fact, and I might have to let that one go onto the onto that side.
I don't know. It's very symbolic.
It's good, but maybe we'll leave that for the updated version in another few years.
Jim, I had a question for you.
Yep.
Speaking of separating things, how did you, or did you have any issues as you wrote this to approach it in kind of a neutral manner rather than a stick player, you know, interviewing Emmett and being in awe and all of that kind of stuff?
Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess the first bit is that I really
came over here. They could.
Did the best that I could to let the facts speak for themselves. So to use old clippings, to use concert reviews, to use the resources that are already out there, to step back impartially and present that story as an independent observer. But then I think part of the richness of the story is that I get it. Like I understand what's different about the stick, and about how when you pick up the instrument and you're holding it in front of your body and you're playing, it's just such a natural thing, and the shoulders are free. You don't have a guitar weighing you down, you know. So I get it from that angle. There was so much stuff though, and Emmett talks about his boxes, and I spent hours and hours and hours going through his boxes of memorabilia and press clippings and recordings and stuff like that. So there's no shortage of just factual stuff to put out there, but to have that filter of again understanding, you know, and to be playing this instrument and to know what it's like to be up on stage and have people just staring at you because they have no idea what you're doing, you know, and how like you can't be making all that noise, like you got a tape, you're cheating somehow, and to be able to understand that that's part of the whole stick experience, and to be part of the stick community as well, I think makes digesting those facts and putting the spin on those facts makes it a richer story.
And you talk about the timing is right, and I think the timing was in a way too soon for the public to really recognize what the instrument was at the time of the invention. When you would hear it recorded, you would think, well, this guy is just overdubbing, because this was the time in history that overdubbing just came on the scene. And also, it was the time when synthesizers just came on the scene. Just came on the scene. Somebody's mic is feeding back.
So Les Paul said that a lot of people listen with their eyes and not their ears, right? So they would look and they wouldn't understand what was going on, and they would assume something else was happening.
Right. Yeah. Now with YouTube and being able to visibly perceive the instrument and understand what you're seeing is happening in live, real time, it is really the aha moment for the public.
For sure, and I noticed a really interesting shift in the magazines. There was just a couple of mentions. Actually, Emmett just did an interview with Nick Beggs in Bass Player magazine, not Bass Guitar magazine, the UK version. And John Mayung has an article in there, as does Les Claypool. And they both talk about the stick, but now when these references to the stick are showing up in other places, they no longer explain what it is. You know, Tony Levin is now described as a stick player or a stickist, and there's no explanation in this mainstream press about what that is. So the instrument itself, especially among musicians, is now becoming part of the mainstream. I was in a cab a couple of years ago here in Calgary with a guitar player who was doing a show, and he asked me, you know, what kind of music I liked, and I told him, and he said, "Well, you should check out this stick instrument." You know, and just this random guy.
Really?
Yeah, you know, so it's becoming part of just the mainstream vernacular, and it's only going to become more and more so as the future.
Yeah, it takes time.
Totally. Well, it was years. You know, the piano was hundreds of years. The guitar itself was hundreds of years. You know, the guitar is a really mainstream, popular instrument. You know, is 100 years, maybe a little bit more. The electric guitar is what? I think the Strat just had its 50th birthday, something like that, 60th birthday for the Stratocaster, something along those lines. So we're talking really young. But it's a different world, and with the internet and such, it's a whole new world.
Yeah, you know, Jim, there was confusion for me. Like, I wanted to play live because of all the overdubbing being done in the recording studios. More and more, the Beatles were experimenting with overdubbing. You know, they wrote tracks to ping pong their soundtracks on. And so I wasn't even interested. I tried to ignore it because I wanted to play live. And I would think anybody would film me playing live, well, that would be good. But to play a record, that seemed discouraging. And it took me till 1985 to do Parallel Galaxy and actually put it on LP. But there was another thing going on, and that was the search for the new sound in the 70s. And what they're really talking about is synthesizer. Keyboard synthesizer mainly, and so they'd say, "Oh, the stick's a new sound," and I'd say, "No, it's just a different way of playing on strings."
Yeah.
And so there's frustration about that.
Yeah, and that's a big distinction too. That's a big distinction. And to get back to Russell's question, that's one thing that I understand, right? So in putting this story together, I get that piece, you know. So I think I can communicate that effectively.
Is there any of the details that us real gear geeks would be interested in, like different innovations? And,
Yep, for sure, absolutely.
Fantastic. Cool.
Yep, step through them without boring details, for sure, like without not getting into the minutia of it, but absolutely, and that's a huge part of it. The evolution of the instrument from accordion to guitar to freedom guitar to different kinds of sticks, and then the actual stick itself, and then different models, and different pickups and innovations that way, and different numbers of strings. The grand stick, the SB7, which we were talking about the other day, which is the precursor to the SB8, before the stick bass, and it had a thinner board with 7 strings on it. He made a 14-string stick once for actually a Canadian stick player. So NS stick, of course, and then the different types of woods, and right up into the rail board. So the very end of it is a little appendix that I've added, another 3 or 4 pages, that talks about the rail board and the development of the rail board and that piece of the puzzle.
Are there pictures too of these things? I imagine there are no pictures. But.
Not yet, but we'll work that out. We'll work the layout. So after I get it back from the copy editor, so I have a person proofreading it to make sure I put S's at the end of all my words and forms instead of froms, and etc. We're going to work on the layout, work on that piece.
Cool.
So, Jim, sorry, one more question here, or
Yep.
maybe a few.
Yep.
Emmett is a colorful person,
Yep.
and he's got a lot to say. Was there ever a moment when you were like, how am I going to write this? Like, I don't know if the language that we speak is going to be able to like accurately explain what I've just heard or experienced, right? Or saw or even heard.
Yeah. So in that case, I let Emmett's words speak for themselves, and I'll quote what he says. The fun part about that, though, is that I'll have a phone conversation with him, and I'll record and transcribe, and then I'll let his words do the work, and then I'll send it back down to him, and he'll look at it and say, "What was I saying? What does that even mean?" So there are times when he couldn't even sort out his own language. So then we'd hammer it back and forth and come to some kind of mutual understanding that the message was getting across, and then away we'd go.
Yeah, Gene, I did not make things easy for Jim. I would go far afield and try to form connections, and Jim's into that too. And so for a while, the title of the book was going to be something about meaningful connections, making music meaningful by way of chords and harmonic progressions, making an instrument that can make your improvising meaningful, to have context to it beyond what just playing melody. I was so tired of the 2/5 jam session, the 2 minor seventh to the 5 dominant seventh, and back and forth. Oh man. I heard it so many times, played it so many times in Laurel Canyon, and you'd get stuck on it, and if you were a little bit stoned, well, then you'd be stuck for hours on it. And so I wanted to be able to play chord changes, and so Jim was very much into that meaningful music, meaningful life.
Yeah. So I remember that came from you saying that chords add depth and meaning to the melody, and I latched on to that idea. And originally one of the working titles was Search for Depth and Meaning, and that idea that as you change the chord, the note itself, like a C has one relation to a C major chord, and another to a G, and another to an F, and so the relationship, and another to an A minor, how that note, even though it doesn't change, the whole quality of that note changes in relationship to the chord. So the chord giving depth and meaning to the melody.
Yeah, and it's a style now that I hear more and more in popular music, where the melody is simple and they might dwell on one note. It might be the major third or even the tonic, and then they travel through all these chord changes to get back to that place. Yeah. And still a real mystery, a haunting about that.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds kind of clinical as a title.
Totally, yeah. So I see.
Depth and meaning.
A question. Oh, so after that, it was called "It Felt Like Flying," which was what Emmett said as he first did his freehands technique. I said, "What was it like?" And he said, "It felt like flying."
That's a good one.
And the picture that Gene's using for the Freehands Academy, that's a picture that Dan put together, which at one point was going to be the cover of the book, which represents that idea, that flying. And now it's Stickman. I'm going to call it Stickman. The story of Emmett Chapman and the instrument he created is the subtitle.
I like it.
Yeah.
The depth and meaning concept, I'm not a religious person, but I'm very interested in religions, and religion can give depth and meaning to your life. It might be a very cliched one, but it still makes you part of something larger. Well, for me, it was all about. Oh, there goes my phone.
It's all about business.
Yeah, you got that right. But it was about investing in my own life, in my own mind, reading, education, putting things together, having context, being able to relate one thing to another thing, comparisons, and it might be a fool's errand to try to build and invest in your own mind, because it's just a piece of flesh tissue. But, or so most of us, a lot of us believe. My daughter would disagree with me. my daughter Diana. But depth and meaning is sort of the only solace you have if you don't belong to some congregation of some religious group, you know. So that's how I always felt.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's my spiritual moment. That's as far as we get on the spiritual moment. And I'm not the one being interviewed. I'm supposed to be doing the interviewing.
You are, although, yeah, as soon as I saw you up there, I thought to myself, no, this is just going to switch into me asking a question or two and sitting back and listening.
It could happen. It could happen. But everybody else is coming and jumping in too. So
good. And I'll throw it out to you guys. Any questions for me in particular?
Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. What is the main characteristic of the stick that you, as a biographer, think makes the instrument more massified than other instruments that have been created in the last years? What do you think makes the difference?
From a physical standpoint, it's a balanced instrument, right? So as opposed to a guitar where you have two different hands doing the things, the stick is
it's ergonomic.
It's ergonomic, and it has a symmetry to it and a balance to it, and you can play it in a very relaxed manner. Everything just fits. Like I don't have an instrument here, but I keep going like this, and I know that when I have my stick in front of me, I go like this, and there's no strain on my back, on my shoulders, on my arms, and I can play. So just the simple structure and immediacy and response of a musician playing the instrument, it has all the bases. It has the range and the two-handedness of the piano, with the personality and the immediacy and the closeness and the physicality of the guitar. From a more of a metaphorical sense, it's a blank slate. The instrument is still completely a blank slate, and that's what always attracts me to it. And I keep thinking that. So at the beginning, I said when we were talking about improvising that I find it difficult to play other tunes. Really easy to play my own music. And every time I pick up the instrument, I'm not thinking, okay, I've got to sound like Greg Howard or Steve Adelson or Emmett or anybody else. I can just play. There's no history to it, you know. So I'm not picking up the guitar and playing Jeff Beck licks. I have this blank slate in front of me to pick up and play, and this tabula rasa to explore on. And I think that's why that's what attracts me to it. That's what attracts me to this instrument in particular. And to tell the story, it's just a combination of being part of the stick community and joining back in '93 and becoming pretty immersed in it right away. You know, I was performing very, very early. I went to seminars, you know, back in '94, I think, in Vancouver was the first one I went to. So meeting Greg and Bob Culbertson and just becoming a part of that stick community. And this is my piece to give back. I haven't had a chance to say that before, but you know, this is my piece of the puzzle that I can add to the story. You know, I won't play like Bob Culbertson or Greg or Steve or Nick Beggs or Tony Levin even. So that's what they're adding. This is the unique original piece to the story that I can add.
That's great.
So I guess maybe someone else has some questions to direct to Jim about his own career. He is a teacher as well as a musician and a biographer, and if somebody wants to know about what kind of music he plays or his activities, now would be a good time to ask, I guess. Anybody has anything?
I've always got questions. And I'll jump in. Joel, Tom, you know, if you guys have something like, you know, now's the time to do it. Samson, if you had one that you wanted to ask, because I'll just keep going. I'll just keep jumping in until somebody else grabs the opportunity.
Well, I was going to ask about your new gig.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Oh. About what it's like for you to change your status or your job positions in Canada, and what it's going to be like for you up there.
So I'm now the acting assistant principal at Cochrane High School, which is moving into more of an administration role, but still as a teacher. And I've always been a teacher, even when I was trying to play music professionally. I actually did more teaching than playing, and has always been that's always been part of who I am. So this now is just an extension of that. Now the best part about this job, though, so back when I was teaching a lot of music privately, I'd be teaching in the evenings and then trying to play. So now I've shifted my teaching gig to the daytime. So I've got my evenings and weekends free to play the music and do these other things. So a complete shift, but interesting that now I'm free to do those other things. So I found a way to marry the responsibilities of putting food on the table with having the time to do these other things that feed my soul.
So Jim, you're teaching and you're an assistant principal?
No, just more assistant principal as of next year. So
that's going to mean a whole different set of administrative duties for you, probably.
Yeah.
That'll be a big change for you, and probably cut into your teaching time.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it'll cut into the teaching time a lot, which is fine. I'll just refer to my horoscope though, and make sure that I'm
Jupiter is high.
Good.
Summertime and Jupiter is high.
So Jim, that means that you're headed upward in the GS level of civil service in the Canadian government. Would that be correct?
Yeah. Although there's big differences between the way it's structured down in the States and the way it is up here. So even though I am a public employee, I certainly don't feel like I'm a public employee.
Right. But it's supposed to get somewhere. I was a public employee for a while, working for the State Personnel Board, downtown LA, First Hill, and we interviewed the people, job applicants for working for the state of California. And I remember they gave us the lecture, when we were first hired on, what it means to be a public employee and how you serve the public and how you might not get all the benefits that you think you're going to get working in private enterprise, but this is public service. And I remember all that. There's probably an ethic like that up there in Canada too, I suppose.
There is, except the teachers are paid well up here. We're paid better than they are down in the States.
Bravo.
It's a very different situation.
Yeah.
You get a big summer vacation.
I do. Which I'm taking a day off to come into work, but I'm taking time off of that to do this, so it all balances out.
Hey, Samson, did you have a question for Jim?
Yeah, I did. Jim, have you checked into maybe turning the book that you're working on, doing like another version of it in like iBooks, where it's a lot more dynamic, a little more interactive, where you can watch videos and like that sort of thing within the book? Have you looked into that at all?
Yeah, I'm nodding my head. In fact, I've actually made an iBook of it that I did as a test, as an edit, and I like it a lot. So that's definitely a potential for sure. Yeah, in fact, I've done the last series of editing on my iPad through iBooks. It's amazing. It's a really amazing thing. My question though is whether to use iBooks Author or to do a more generic EPUB type format. The problem with iBooks Author is that it's Mac proprietary, right? Which is a lot of people, but certainly not everyone. But yeah, thanks. That's a good question and definitely something.
Would it be that hard to? Would it be that hard to cross-platform something like that?
I don't think so. It's just a matter of finding somebody that can do it. The novella that I wrote is actually only an EPUB, but it's available in all the different formats. I did that through Smashwords, and that's available in any format all the electronic formats and PDF as well. So I only did a digital version of that. I didn't do a print version.
So Jim, if an iBooks version of this Stickman bio. I didn't know you changed the name. I thought it was still I felt like flying, but Stickman's good. That's who I am. iBook version. Um, there must be a lot more opportunities to put photos in there, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Almost unlimited. Almost unlimited. And video and links and all sorts of stuff. It's a pretty rich format.
Well, that would be quite a big task undertaking to do that. And once you had it, it would be a whole lot more interesting, I would think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, like I say, definitely I've already put together an iBooks version of it just for myself. Definitely something to explore for sure.
Okay.
And I like the idea of keeping it in the digital domain, rather than having these print books around. I'm reading very, very few print, like actual hard copy books these days. Almost everything is on my little iPad mini.
So if I could, Jim, can you talk, because I got an iPad mini like 3 days ago. Can you talk about, like, because I haven't read a book on my iPad. I like the feel of a book, right? And the texture of a book. And I used to work at a company called Biblio.com, and we sold used, rare, and out-of-print books.
Yeah.
What would that look like for Emmett? Would that then have live videos? We see all these... Okay.
Yeah, it would. It would be completely multimedia, interactive. Different ways to do it. You can actually embed the videos in there as well. You could link to a website that streams videos. It really, as multimedia as you could imagine it being. It could be.
Yeah, it changes the experience
entirely. Which it does change the experience entirely. And again, the technology for me isn't a replacement. It's an addition. So, approaching it that way might be a great way to look at it. Great way to go.
I think you showed me something like that Sting did once, right?
Yeah.
That was really interesting.
Yeah, his isn't as much of a book as it is kind of an app, like an iPad app. But there are some amazing books. If you go, like, if you have iTunes on your computer, you can download all kinds of different stuff. And iBooks is now a separate program on your computer or on your mini or your phone. You can download that, and there's tons. Actually, the Beatles have a Yellow Submarine is a free book that iTunes gives away. That's pretty neat and shows a lot of just kind of simple versions of what's possible. But it's unbelievable. And textbooks now are going this route. So rather than having a physical copy of the textbook, you've got this electronic digital version that's interactive as well.
Yeah,
I just wanted to put my vote in
school, and when you do like science stuff, you're able to move things around.
Well, I had two people going at once there. I couldn't quite.
Go ahead, Samson. Sorry.
I said, well, we homeschool, so when we use like science textbooks and we use iBooks for them, you can actually go into, like, if you're studying dinosaurs and actually move the dinosaur in like 360 degrees or the skeleton or like do all that. And I was wondering, like, you could do something like that with a stick, where somebody could just manipulate the photo right there and be able to do a 360 look at it. I mean, there's so much potential. Like, if you have any type of Apple device and you can just get on iBooks to check it out, you'll be able to see, like, how, because even getting author, I did like my own first chapter of the history of the stick just to mess around and see if I could do it, embedding videos in and pictures and things like that. And it's really easy to do, and it's very interesting how much you can actually get in there.
Yeah, my wife's grade 2 class did a project on iBooks Author, and it's brilliant. These two kids did a thing on bats, and they have themselves recorded, and it's unbelievable. This grade 2 classroom that did this stuff. It's definitely something worth checking out. Thanks for that.
Yeah, I just wanted to put my plug in to make something that's available on multiple platforms. I think that the audience is small enough where we don't want to alienate anybody based on a platform. So I would highly suggest that if it's at all possible. And nowadays it really should be.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Cool. Well, listen, I think we're pretty close to our time, so I did want to make sure. And Russell, is there anything that we missed along the way here?
Nope, just the wrap up of announcements, but nothing else.
Okay. Let's see. So, well, for starters, Jim, Thank you very, very much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you for organizing this and putting this together. And thank you, Emmett, for firing the questions in my direction for a change.
Oh, glad to do it.
Yeah, I'm. Jim had also done the. You did the interview with Dan, which was so fantastic. That was I think the second or the third Free Hands Friday. So that was. I'm very hopeful that Jim and Emmett, that you'll be back to share what you know, or if there's people that you want to see interviewed. Just kind of on a related note. And Francisco, not to put you on the spot, but we're also hoping to kind of expand our operations and do more programs. The Canadian program has been so incredibly successful that we're looking to have other, Dale, who we're all kind of missing right now, has been such a fantastic proponent of just pulling up and pulling together all these great Canadian stick players and people who are in the stick community, like you. And like Pat Braden, who I hadn't heard of before, so that was fantastic.
He's been around for a long time, Pat.
Yeah, so he was a really cool cat, and we got a lot of great feedback from him, and of course Jim Meyer and all his work with the Vancouver seminar and Dale herself. So I'm asking Francisco.
Yeah. Yes, I'll be glad to. There are a lot of Spanish-speaking or Latin American countries doing interesting stuff, and I was talking with Gene yesterday, and probably we know more about you people than you know about us. That's probably how it's happening. So it would be interesting maybe to show some stick players from around here.
Yes. Yes, and Emmett, I think you would agree. You were mentioning to me there were some players down in Mexico, and of course Guillermo and all the work that he's doing.
Yes, there's Mauricio Sotelo. He was with Cabezas de Cera, and he and his brother still play together. They play duos. They do college concerts and even some lectures, college lectures. And he's also our dealer in Mexico now, Mauricio Sotelo. And then there's other excellent artists down there, including Atias.
Jofflet.
Yeah, Jofflet. Thank you for that. And Heddery, whose last name he goes by the name of Heddery, but he's in Mexico now, also playing. And there might be one or two more down there. Our oldest stick player down there was Alex Cruikshank, which I guess is a Dutch name, but he was Mexican, and I don't know how he got that name, but he was our original. Alex Cruikshank I guess that means a crooked stick, I suppose.
The idea is that it's kind of like we see what Jim's doing by doing like his part, right? Like, and I very much identified this with Jim when you were talking about like this is your contribution. Guess what? I'll never be like Bob. I'll never be like Steve. I just won't, But seeing what you're doing is so fantastic, and your book is going to make such an impression. And as the community grows, and I know that Francisco is going to be a big part of that, is just kind of building this bridge, right? Just this silly language is getting in the way. What we really should be doing is playing music and listening to each other's music, and trying to support each other and find ways to like each other's pages and that sort of thing. So I know that I'm looking forward to that, and so we've talked about in the future that coming up, and of course. Looking forward to the release, Jim. I don't know when that's going to be.
Yeah. Well, like I say, the hope is to get it out in time for the Free Hands Academy.
That's about a month from now.
Man, I'm just saying, like.
That's the hope. We'll
okay.
See.
All right. I love that optimism. Well, I'd like to again thank everyone. Starting with you, Jim, of course, and
well, my pleasure.
Mountain Brothers, of course, for making it out here. Thank you very much. Dan, for stirring it up. I have an older brother too, so you gotta kind of rib him a little bit while you can, and Joel for representing Canada here. Thank you, Samson, for good questions. Right on, and Tom, thanks for joining us. I'm sorry to get you the invite sooner. We will be back. I think I think next week. Russell, what do we have going on next week? I've lost track.
Next week is Nathan Aswell, and stick player.
Nice.
So that'll be cool.
Yeah. And a long time stick player as well. It was his seminar in Vancouver in 1994 that I was first at, and actually got a lot of the ball rolling. He's a great guy.
Cool. And then after that, on the 25th, Rick Beyer. And then August 3rd, Greg Howard. That should be very interesting. And then the rest of August is dedicated to the Freehands Academy, with I think the big one being August 17th, which is the State of the Stick address. So stay tuned and tune in for all those. Lots of good stuff coming up, and we're getting more views, and so good stuff.
Cool.
All right.
Yeah. Thanks everyone. And I guess we can just end on a happy Freehands Friday. We'll see you next week with Nathan.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was a lot of fun.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes. Thanks, Gene. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.